Hi everyone, it's Laura here for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm gonna show you how to create an ocean themed card using the new Mermaid for Each Other stamp set. As a first step, I started working on my images, and for this card I chose the adorable mermaid and merman from the Studio Katia Mermaid for Each Other stamp set, which was released in May 2018. I repeatedly stamped the images with VersaFine Onyx black ink on some Bristol Vellum cardstock by Strathmore, and while the ink was still wet, I coated them with clear embossing powder, and then I melted the embossing powder with my heat gun. For the coloring today, I will be using my Zicklin Color Real Brush markers, which I will blend out with a water brush. For all the areas except for the hair, I will be using two markers and a water brush to add shadows and create dimension. I am placing the shadows with my darker marker as if the light source is coming from the top left with respect to the images, and I am then using my lighter marker to blend out the shadows and create my mid-tone color. And finally, I am creating my highlights by blending the mid-tone color out with the water brush. I will be using the same techniques on all the elements of the images except for the hair, and for that I used one marker only for each of the images, and as you will see later on, I just used some flicking motions to create the hair strands. I also created a color chart where I listed all the markers that I used to color today's images, and if you want you can find that in the blog post that you will find linked in the description box down below. And I will now leave you with some music while I finish up coloring these images and come back when it's time to take care of the background. Once all my images were colored, I used the coordinating dies to the Mermaid for Each Other stamp set to die cut them out, and then I started working on my background. I wanted to create a very textured watercolor background, so I used my Ganzai Tambi watercolor and a little trick to create a lot of structure. I started by laying some clean clear water on a piece of watercolor cardstock that I had previously taped onto a hardboard, and then I started adding my colors, as you can see, in a very messy way, keeping the lighter ones towards the top and using darker and darker shades as I moved to the bottom of the page. And as you can see, this background doesn't really require any particular watercoloring skill, but the result, in my opinion, is really beautiful. Once I laid down all the colors, I added some water splatters to start adding some texture to the background, and then I took some kitchen salt and I sprinkled it generously all over the background. And the salt will react with the water and will create some really interesting patterns as the piece dry, and you will see in a little bit what a gorgeous background I obtained. While the background was drying, I started working on my front panel. I cut some white cardstock to an A2 size using the Darling Ribbon Creative dies, and then I used this star die in the mini tags die set to cut 3 openings on the sides of this panel. And I am checking the position of the stars using one of the dies in the dotted pattern set 1, as that will be the focal panel on my card. Once the background was dry, I removed it from the hardboard, dusted off the salt grains that had stuck to it, and quickly heated it again with my heat tool to make sure it was completely dry. And look at all the details and the texture. It's incredible how quick and easy it was to create such a gorgeous watercolor piece. I then die cut the background using again the rectangle die in the Darling Ribbon die set, and then I used one of the dies in the dotted patterns set 1 creative dies to cut out my focal panel from the background. And I used the T-square ruler to make sure it was as straight and centered as possible. And here I am showing you how I will be layering the 3 pieces to create the background of my card. I decided to position the sentiment on my focal panel, and I used the one in the Mermaid for Each Other stamp set that reads Mermaid for Each Other. I stamped it with Versamark ink on the lower portion of my focal panel. I then coated it with white embossing powder, tapped off the excess, and then used my heat gun to melt the embossing powder. And at this point, all my elements are ready and I can go ahead and start assembling my card. I have a white top folding A2 card base and I will be layering the panels as I'm showing right now, with the watercolor rectangle being on the very back, the white panel just above it, and then I will raise the focal panel on the center of my card using some fan foam and some double-sided adhesive. And after I had adhered everything together, I decided that these mer people needed some cute crowns, so I quickly stamped, colored and die cut them off camera, and now I am adding them to my images using Nouveau Deluxe adhesive. And finally, to add more detail and a little bit more contrast in an otherwise monochromatic scene, I added some Nouveau drops in Ruby Slippers, and that finished off my card. And that's it for today. I really hope you liked this card, and I hope I inspired you to create with the adorable Studio Katia Mermaid for Each Other stamp set. Don't forget to subscribe to the Studio Katia channel for more inspiration from the design team. Thank you all so much for watching and have a great day.